All right. We're live.
We are live.
Can't be that easy. After all this work.
Is there anybody else, or is it just us?
Looks like we got two people, so welcome whoever you are.
Well, I guess we better start talking then. All right. So this will just be three marketers shooting the breeze about gated or ungated content. Where I think I'll start off with, I just randomly happened in a really awful example. And what I wanted, this topic kind of could set people off. It's like, no, we're not here to recommend that you gate everything. No, we're not here to recommend that you ungate everything. We're here to talk through some nuance of this. And I know some people have a visceral reaction. In case anybody's here looking for validation for like a crappy ebook gate that they're about to do, you're not going to find that here. So I'm going to share my screen really quick and just walk somebody through just a really god-awful example that I came across yesterday.
Well, Mike, as you're jumping in, I think also if you're looking for a validation that you should just totally ungate everything all the time, no matter what, you're also not going to get that here. So either way, we're going to disappoint and frustrate.
It's all about the nuance. So here's something I came across. It popped into my feed yesterday. It's a thing from Gartner. Seems innocuous to a certain extent. Like it's an interesting graphic. Okay, fine. All right. 9 action items. I mean, it's all right. Whatever. And then, but here it says, our latest playbook. Like, all right, well, that playbook is usually, I'm expecting something hefty, right? Now I know it's Gartner. I know they're going to make me fill out a form. Okay, whatever. I bite. And I'm like, oh my God, it's a single page. It's a single field form. This is amazing. I'll do that. Fine, whatever. Oh, crap. I should have cleared my cookies. Dang it, I ruined it. Okay. What's going to happen here if you have not been cookied is you get a 25 field form from Gartner like you usually do. It's like literally you're signing your freaking life away. Right? And only then do they give you the download. All right. So let's pretend that you just saw a 25 field form, which is awful. Here's the playbook, guys and gals and everybody. Okay, great, whatever. Top questions. Same slide that I already saw on LinkedIn. Connect with us. That is not a freaking playbook. You just completely wasted my time. And oh, by the way, serious? The minute I did that, did I receive an email that said, hey, please confirm your email so you can receive other crappy communication from us? Yes, I did.
Okay. Oh, man.
So do not, for the love of God, please don't do that. This is what most people think of when people think of gated content. And I think maybe this is where I'll kick us off, gentlemen, is I think part of the problem, part of the reason why, and I'm going to stop sharing. Part of the reason why some people have such a visceral reaction to the word gated content even, or the phrase, is that people see that. And they think, oh, gated content is a gated ebook, and a really crappy, fluffy one at that. Yes, that is part of it. But what I will posit to the crew here, and for anybody else listening, is that's not the only content out there that can and should or shouldn't be gated. There are events, there are newsletters, there are other content-based experiences, there are calculators, the list can go on and on and on and on and on. So, Joseph and James, that's my lead in. Where do you guys want to take it?
That's atrocious. That's crazy. If that were a 50-page playbook and had real value, even still gating that might be obnoxious, right? With the 25 fields or, whatever. I know sometimes I've seen this often these days where CRMs will know, like you said, that you've been cookied, and so they'll know what forms you have filled out already, and it'll swap in new fields to enrich the data that they already have on you if you haven't filled it out. That's a whole separate question, but we talked about this recently. Even playbooks themselves as content, demand gen content, is very rarely helpful. And so if you're going to gate something, making it something that's really, really helpful and valuable is like the most important thing you can do. I think that's the overall theme that we're saying here is make sure that it's valuable. It's not just a 4-page slide with a contact us page and a title slide. That's crazy. I haven't seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I mean, and I'll jump in, and I know I'll get some hate over this just because I've had this conversation with my friend Chris Spellman. If you joined us, shout out to you. We've gone back and forth on this, and I know, if you've been following people in the SaaS space, particular groups of people that are absolutely anti-gated content, they're going to say ebooks are horrible every time. And to Mike's point, ebooks aren't the only thing, and they are probably the least sophisticated way of doing gated content, and ultimately typically the least valuable for your audience too. So, having said that, you can actually have ebooks that add value to people that are good and are worth downloading. And, I've downloaded some ebooks that really were good, and I really did add value, and I was glad that I did it. And so I think there's two pieces to the equation. You should always have really good ungated content. Let's just start with that. If most of your content consists of things that are gated, or you're putting most of your effort into gated content, you're losing out, because our perspective is building relationships at scale. Like, that's what marketing does well. And if everything is behind a paywall, or everything's behind a gated content, you're not building a great relationship with people. So put really good content out that's better than anybody else is doing out for free, ungated, end of story. If you're not doing there, stop listening and go do that first. But then the second piece is, if you are going to get gate content, have some strategy behind it, understand why you're doing it, and give content that is really excellent, and think through the follow-up. Because those are the two pieces where people really get frustrated with gated content. It's when they download something that's a piece of crap, and then they have a salesperson call them after it's done and say, "Are you ready to buy?" And you're like, "I don't even know who you are. I don't know what product you sell. I was just interested in the playbook." And if you're doing that as a way to, if you're using gated content as a way to feed your SDR team instead of them learning how to go prospect on their own, that's not a good playbook. That's not a winning strategy. That doesn't build long-term relationships with customers. But there are ways to gate certain types of content that do.
Yeah, and what I'll throw out there is, you mentioned you need to have a strategy for gating. I think just as much you need to have a strategy for ungating. Because I think this is a big sort of gap, I think, that exists out there, is the debate of gate versus ungate is, I think, too philosophical for my liking. And it's sort of like, it's sort of what we just talked about, right? That's a good start. But if you are going to ungate, or if you're just not going to gate in the first place, the question then becomes, how do you know what's working? What can you measure? So you have to build your measurement strategy and your go-to-market playbook, for lack of a better word, to accommodate that. Right? You can't just, let's assume you're gating everything and you just remove the quote-unquote paywall or the gate wall, you're going to be in a lot of trouble if you haven't done the other work of, all right, how are we going to understand what works in terms of, whatever. Sure, some of it could be your self-reported attribution. Fine. You can look at things like vanity emails. It's an old school tactic. It's the same thing that you see on billboards, right? It's a vanity URL or a vanity email. That way, and now, again, you got to be careful. Don't let this thing get out of hand, in the sense of every single piece of content you put out there now has a vanity email address. First of all, who the heck's got that many email addresses? And second of all, it just becomes really, really messy. But you can build automated measurement that uses that, right? Is that going to capture everything? No, but it becomes a data point, right? So things like that. You can look for, if you've got like a Gong or just really anything with sales call recording, you can look for specific keywords that you're going to seed in your advertising. Again, that happens all the time with anybody that's running, TV ads or billboards or whatever, right? Like, that's a big part of what they're doing. A lot of it is they're seeding the language that they want to then look for. And you can then look at things like if you got a social listening tool, right? You can look for increased mentions or, things like that of that specific language related to your brand, all this stuff. So there's, again, tactically, there's a bunch of different things you can do, but you got to do those things first. You got to think through them first. Otherwise, all you're going to end up doing is ungating stuff and probably getting fired. So.
I think Christina in the chat on LinkedIn said, yes, think through the follow-up. I will run from SDRs who contact me right after I download something. I think one thing to mention here, like to zoom out a little bit more on what you were saying, Mike, is you have to understand the customer journey or the prospect's journey and what pieces of content they need in that journey, so that if there is follow-up, and follow-up is not bad, but if there is follow-up after a gated piece of content, that it's the right kind of follow-up. And maybe to Christina's point here.
Looks like we lost James.
Oh, can you hear me? I'm here.
Joseph, I think we just lost you.
Oh.
Can you hear me?
Technical issues.
Nope, hold on. We're gonna message him. Technical issues, people. Hold on. All right, James, let's just keep going. All right, cool.
Okay, so it's Joseph that's missing, not me.
Yep, no, I got you.
Okay. Anyway, to Christina's point, you have to understand, like, what are they expecting? What are they needing at this point? Are they ready for a conversation? And one thing that I've done that I like doing was lead scoring to determine that, to help determine. Maybe after filling out one form and filling out the form for one gated piece of content is not enough. I think most of us would agree. But maybe 5 is. If they fill out 5 gated pieces of content, then maybe they're ready for a conversation there. I don't know if that's going to rustle some feathers, but
you're gonna ruffle my feathers. I mean, it's a yes and answer on my part. Actually, is yes. I think lead scoring can help. The problem, though, I would say, is that most, and this I think gets us into the bigger overarching issue. The problem is that most lead scoring is complete random assumptions that are never tested out or proven out. Right. So it's like, oh, well, if you filled out 2 forms, now you're ready. Why? Says who? Right. Like one of the things, especially like, usually you should have maybe jumping the gun, but like my thing is definitely limit what you are going to gate. And it should be maybe a couple key, really big pillar pieces of content or experiences, right? I mean, some things you have to gate, like events. There's only a certain amount of spots. You have to reserve spots. Like that's just an automatic thing, or a newsletter or whatever, right? But outside of that, only gate a couple of things. And that allows you to initially, when you put them out, follow up, but you follow up as the marketer, not as the salesperson. You say, hey, something like literally, like I've done this where I literally just sent a LinkedIn message to somebody who just downloaded something and said, hey, thanks for downloading. Honestly, I'm just curious what caused you to download it, and what'd you get out of it? I won't do it right away. I'll give it a couple of days. That's it. Like, all I want to know is like, why did you download it and what'd you get out of it? Because then that allows me to say, okay, is it valuable? Like after enough people have responded, is there enough value in this thing to gate it in the first place? And what's the intent? That then can drive some sort of scoring and follow-up. But without that, all you're doing is you're just making shit up.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't think something you said there, it just made me think, like you said, if it's valuable enough to gate, then gate it. But I think, I don't know, there's a conversation there to be had about, like, even if it is something super valuable, is it worth gating, right? It's all about the intent. If it's a piece of content that would lead them to need to talk to an expert, then gate it so we can get their information and reach out and provide that next step in the journey. But if it's a top of funnel playbook, or framework or, something like that, then don't gate it. I think like we were talking about this earlier, I think a calculator, a lot of software companies have gated calculators on their website where you can estimate their return on investment for using their software. That might make sense to gate because I'm down to numbers at this point. I'm ready to make a decision based on ROI with the sales rep, and we keep dogging on ebooks and playbooks and things like that. But anything, a white paper, an article, anything like that. Just to throw out one more example, I just realized this. I filled out, or I was about to fill out. I actually didn't because I got frustrated. But the other day I was looking for a ad budget estimator tool online where you plug in, the data that I know about a campaign that I want to run, or impressions or audience size, and to try to get a budget that I should spend out of it. And one of the fields on that calculator was, how many marketing employees do you have? And it's obvious that that's completely irrelevant to what I'm looking for, but helps them qualify me as a candidate, right? So even the way that, if you do gate something, the way that you do it speaks volumes about what your intent is, and you can smell it from a mile away.
Yeah, so I think there's a couple things to chat about here, just to dive into, because we've kind of gone down the measurement track, but to get it back to the actual conversation of gated versus ungated, and when you should or when you shouldn't. I think it goes back to, people talk about HubSpot being the people who originated that, but wasn't it originally Seth Godin talking about permission marketing? Didn't he write the book on permission marketing? So this is just going back way before that to permission marketing. And let's forget about the tactics that people have used for permission marketing and think about the original concept itself. You are asking somebody permission to send them something, and you're giving them something of value, valuable enough for them to say, yes, I want to hear more from you. That's what gated content is for. It's to validate messaging and to have a way to continue the conversation with people. Where you lose it and where we go wrong is when there's a disconnect between what the person gave permission for and then what we're assuming they gave permission for. So if it's an ebook and you send them the ebook as a delivery, that's what they asked for. Now, going beyond that, I would still say it's valid to be sending them follow-up after that that's related to the content. So maybe you summarize what they're going to learn in the ebook in a follow-up email, and you just assume, hey, they're not going to read this. Let's add something that's not saying the exact same thing, but giving them something that's valuable, whether they read the ebook or not, on the same topic. We know they're interested in the topic. So, you're validating interest, and then you can have a follow-up to that could be, depending on how you do it and your setup on the back end, it could be another gated piece of content that goes deeper and adds more value to them. But when they download that piece of content or they fill out the form, you now know not only were they interested in the topic, but we know they're interested in, this piece that's closer to the sale than they were. So for example, say that it is you do a course on doing LinkedIn Live, right? And so you have that course, it's gated, it's like 4-part course, whatever. People aren't going to be frustrated if you send them some tips on LinkedIn Live and how to do it better and more effectively. You could follow that up then with another piece of content that's a workbook on the things you need, a checklist you need before you go do your first LinkedIn Live. Again, most people who downloaded a piece of content on LinkedIn Live aren't going to be frustrated by getting something like that. It's like a content upgrade that makes it even more valuable than what you gave them before. If they fill that out, it shows that they have intent to do LinkedIn Live, more intent than just signing up for your course. Somebody who's taken action. If you reach out to that person, not as a sales call, but as saying, hey, I would love to look over that worksheet with you for free and talk with you through the details and make sure you're not missing anything. I'll help you with your title, totally free. I'd love to sit down and help you with that. I love helping people do live. Most people aren't going to be frustrated if you reach out and contact them in that way. What does that do for you? It builds relationship. You're adding way more value, but beyond that, you actually now know who's consuming your content, that they have interest, and then you're adding even more value than you could through written content. So like, I have a podcast. I know people listen to it. I don't get to know who all of those people are, but if I have a download, then I get to know who that person is. I can reach out to them and build relationship with them without leading to a sale. And then the last thing I'll say on that is there's this amazing way to be able to start sales conversations, because then at the end of that free consulting, you can say, hey, would you like more help with a LinkedIn Live? I have a course that I'll walk you through in a mastermind group, and it's $500. My chance of making that sale went up exponentially by gating that content and walking people through that versus either sending them that offer too early and just cold pitching them and slapping them in the face, or on the flip side, never telling them that the course existed and they have to figure that out on their own through, hopefully they randomly run across it. So to me, it's a way to kind of accelerate that customer journey and get people what they want when they want it.
I think a way to, at least in my mind, to kind of summarize it is the way maybe synthesize what you're talking about is it's all about expectation setting. I think that's the other big problem I see with most gated content is it's like most people and marketers for sure, like we know what we're signing up for like 99% of the time that you fill out the stupid form, like you're going to get again, all the problems that we just described, that's what we're going to face, right? Even if it's a good piece of content where the content itself initially was valuable. And I'll throw out an example in a minute, but you don't see this a lot, but I have seen this in the past. I was trying to find the example. I couldn't before we jumped on here, but there are times where I've seen it's like, hey, download this and we'll send you whatever. It could be an instructional set of videos of how to fill this out, or we'll send you something that's a follow-up. Like you're telling me, hey, I'm going to send you this thing as a follow-up to it. And I promise I won't send you anything else. Like that works because you set the expectation. Like, okay, cool. Yeah, you can send that to me. That's no problem. That's fine. I know what I'm signing up for. Versus if you don't say that, now it's okay. Well, I'm going to guess what I'm going to get. And I think it's going to be something I don't like or I don't need or I don't want. Right. And the example I'll throw out there is, so, we're working through some agency operations upgrades. Right. And part of that is we're looking at changing how we use ClickUp. That's our project management tool. I was doing some research out there and the folks over at ZenPilot popped up and they had I can't remember if they called it an ebook or a guide or whatever, but a really hefty, I think it was like a 50-page guidebook of like, hey, here's how you should think about process optimization, and then how do you transfer that over to the ClickUp ecosystem, right? And they gave enough on the landing page. I'm like, okay, this seems like it'll be valuable. Filled out the form, I downloaded it.
That was just for agency owners, right?
Yeah, so it's
targeted. Even more specific, yeah.
Yeah, so it's very specific, and I'm pretty sure if I remember correctly, I think I got targeted with an ad even. I think is how I came. To be fair, I don't remember if I was searching or if I got targeted with an ad or whatever. Long story short, I ended up over there. I filled out the form. I knew exactly, I had a feeling what was going to happen. What I didn't know was how valuable the thing was going to be. It's actually really, really good. So, congratulations, content people at ZenPilot. It's very good, very useful. Now, what you guys did is you made an assumption that just because I downloaded that thing, I'm in buying mode. I'm not. I've identified I have a problem. I have a lot of problems as a business owner. I got a lot of shit I got to solve. Okay. Is it going to become a priority for me? Yeah, at some point. But virtually all of their emails had some form of, everyone was all really long and kind of regurgitated type stuff. And then, hey, if you'd like to talk, it was all sort of looked like it was coming from a sales rep, which we all know it's all automated, whatever. Right. And then just follow up after follow up after follow up. And at some point I got I think I filled out this was more out of curiosity. They had a calculator or a assessment thing, right? So being the marketer that I am, I had no need to take the assessment. I was just curious how it worked. Right now, these people should know they're dealing with marketing agencies all the time. At least some portion of them are just going to go through that process just to see what they're doing and see if they can steal the idea or something, right? So after I filled that out, again, I guarantee you somewhere in their scoring system is oh, they downloaded the ebook and they filled out this thing. Now I got to send this over to the actual sales rep, and now I get the text email saying, hey, is this still important to you? I'm like, sure, it's important, but I'm still not going to buy right now. Now you're just annoying me, right? So it's this, just to illustrate the point of everything we talked about, ZenPilot people, if you're listening, stop. Maybe at some point I'll do business with you, but not right now. And it's the flip side of that argument you can make is, well, how do we know? Number one, you should know your customer well enough. You're clearly working with marketing agencies, right? So there's got to be other triggers you can look for that actually show intent. And there's other ways you can, again, other ways you can measure. Again, there's vanity email, like all the stuff that we talked about from a measurement perspective. Do all that. Actually find out what get my intent that way, and then come get me. Engage with some of my content on LinkedIn. Again, like all the stuff out there is public. Between Gabby and I, everybody should be able to know exactly what the hell's going on in Proofpoint. You should be able to know what the heck we're doing and when, and just actually time your outreach effectively instead of doing this BS.
Christina has another question specifically about vanity emails and URLs. She says, how do you use vanity emails? I'm familiar with URLs, but not sure if I know what you mean. Could you give an example?
So, that's a good question. Let's assume, and again, careful with this for a variety of reasons, but you can just set up a separate inbox, call it like whatever. Let's assume in our case, call it sales@proofpoint.marketing. Okay, that's the email address. That email address is not used anywhere else other than a specific channel. So I usually will say, let's do it at the channel level. Anything more than that, it becomes unwieldy. You got to start keeping track of what's what. But now, here's the thing: in most CRMs, take Salesforce, you can set up automated lead rules, or I forget the actual name for it, that says if an email comes into this inbox, create a lead and assign the source to be whatever, LinkedIn or a specific campaign, whatever you want it to be. Right. So you can create automations that then now populate your marketing source field, for example, where you don't have to ask for it. You don't need their contact info. But and again, is everybody going to email? No, for that matter, I would be willing to say, depending on the type of content, maybe 5% of people will. But that's okay. First of all, that shows intent, right? So now you've got another form of intent where they no longer have to maybe come to your site, come back and fill out a general form, right? So it gives them another option, etc. So anyway, the vanity email is just one method. This is where you have to triangulate your data and get better at, you can do a vanity email plus a vanity URL plus all these other things. And now you've got a better idea of what this piece of content is doing.
Wait, so Mike, real quick, just going back to who did you say it was? It was
ZenPilot.
ZenPilot. So for ZenPilot, they don't know where you're at because they didn't have somebody talk to you. So, I think the challenge of ungating everything is you just have to wait for somebody to decide to reach out to you. Now, yes, if somebody reaches out to you, they have high intent and they're ready to buy, but that's people who are in the market. And so the question is, same thing that we do when we're talking about building a personal brand, right? You build a personal brand, not so that all of a sudden everybody's in the market right now and they're just going to be blowing up your inbox, so that you can start real conversations with people, see what the market's saying, learn, engage, and then when somebody's ready to buy, they come in. And I think if you purely eliminate gated content, what you're losing is the ability to get those conversations kickstarted and build real, actual relationships with people. So if all your sales team is supposed to do is talk to people who are ready to buy, and that's it, you're going to have really shallow relationships with people. You're going to have a lot of transactional relationships. Whereas if your sales team is there to build relationships with people over the long haul and to land, and especially with clients that we work with, B2B, large B2B deals, those don't happen overnight. And they are mostly relationship oriented, and people work with people that they know or that they know that other people have worked with them. So the earlier you can have a real one-to-one human communication with somebody, the better. And the problem is, you got to do that right. And if you reach out too early, then people don't like that, right? The flip side is if you reach out with a sales-oriented conversation, most people don't like that. And I think so many people do that. So many companies do that. Take the approach of trying to have a sales conversation too early. That's really the big problem. Whereas if we step back and we go, well, why do we have a sales conversation? Let's just have a conversation. That helps us understand the market and start building rapport with people way ahead. And gated content is a way to do that. How do we get real conversations with real human beings to validate what we're doing earlier in the process? And if you have stages of gated content set up in the right way, it's going to be really natural for somebody from your team to have a real conversation with somebody. And then the goal is that content that you've created, the course or whatever you've given them, and then that upgrade that they fill out, those should all be moving people towards your point of view. And so, as they're going through that, they're going to start to think in the way that you think. So you're indoctrinating them in your company's point of view. Then they get on with your consultant who's going to give them some extra pointers of what they could do better. That's, again, indoctrinating them in your point of view, helping them to think of the world in the way that you do. Now they're far more likely, when they're ready to buy, to work with you. And when they go to talk to a vendor, they're going to be using your language that your consultant helped them with. Like, you're establishing the questions they're going to ask when they are going out to find a vendor for this. And most likely, if you've really added that much value, they're going to go to you first anyway and just see if you could solve their problem. So It's about starting real, genuine conversations as early in the process as possible, instead of waiting for somebody to come to you.
Yeah, I think you bring up a really good point. I probably shouldn't be dogging on those guys as much, because they did some good stuff. So, like, one of their emails had the offer was to schedule a strategy session, whatever, right? I think where they lost me to a certain extent was in some of the other things. But so there were some good things they did. But like what I would maybe do differently is I would think about, all right, how can I build this relationship better? Like, so if I understand my customer, it's maybe I have a course as the next thing, right? And I push people into a course. That's more of a, hey, let me hold your hand a little bit through this. And then with that, then the next step is, okay, either A, you're too busy to take the course. Fine. I still have a follow-up. Like, hey, it looks like you didn't take the course. You didn't finish it. Is there anything we can help you with? Now you're using data that supports what you're reaching out about. Or, and again, a course is just one idea. It could be a template. It could be a worksheet. It could be something. I'll also be honest, maybe there might have been some other link in there that I missed, but their emails were just like 25 paragraphs long. I'm like, I don't get time for that.
Yeah. But I'm just thinking, like, if they had some worksheet, maybe I'm wrong, and I'm just kind of curious. And, it's hard to tell in one situation, but if they had a worksheet to make that more actionable, or a course, like you said, you go through that and you fill out that sheet, or you go through the course. If somebody finishes a course from you, that's a different level of intent. And it's more worth it for you to have a conversation with somebody that went all the way through your course than 100%. Somebody who downloaded your original ebook or whatever, right? And so that's the point that I'm trying to make. You walk people to a certain place where it makes sense for a human to talk to them. They're going to be happy a human talks to them at that point. So if you went all the way through their course and they have somebody that reaches out and said, hey, we want to have somebody sit down with you. Like, this isn't a sales call, and it really can't be if you're going to say that. This isn't a sales call. We just love helping people with their processes. It's what we do. We're passionate about it. We'll sit down with you, go through this workbook, and you're going to be able to take that and implement it with or without using our stuff. If they do that, far more likely that you actually engage with that kind of action, and then you go through that template with them, and then at the end of that, they go, hey, man, would you like any more help? Or we'd love to offer you a free, trial, or whatever it is that they do. Way more likely that they get you to move forward on that. And it's not any more investment from the sales team, because the sales team right now is talking to tons of people that are never going to buy from them. And instead of building rapport with each of those conversations, and, maybe they don't buy at this company, but they remember that interaction in the future one, and then they come back to you, instead of building on each relationship, you're pushing people away with each interaction. So instead, take some of your sales team's meetings and put them into that person actually adding value in an early, in an earlier than they're ready to buy stage. And to me, that just builds so much value and rapport with your prospects.
Yeah. I want to tie a couple of pieces together here with some math, actually, and then I think, James, you look like you maybe have something to say, so I'll kick it over to you. The thing to think about is going back to, I think, James, you said, is it worthwhile gating? And there's two components to that. One is it worthwhile for you as the business to gate it? And the other component is it worthwhile for this to be gated for the customer? So the interesting one in my mind is the first one. Is it worthwhile for you, right? The idea is, if I gate it, I'm going to get more contacts, and I can get more of these conversations going. What I would encourage people to think about is, at what point do you gate? Right. So in this example, let's assume we have a hefty guidebook and then a course, and then a sales conversation, ideally. I would gate at the course level. First of all, you pretty much, I mean, you don't have to gate at the course, but I would gate the course. Because in the course is tied to the guidebook, because maybe in the guidebook, you're like, hey, on every single page, you can say, you know, if you want help with this, you want some hand holding, we have a course, you can take the course. All you got to do is give us your email kind of thing. Like, here's the link to it. The more people that get that guide and read the guide, the more people are going to take the course. And if you take the course, now you actually show intent. So my goal is like, it's sort of like the whole concept of, you know, the headline's job is to read you the second line. The second line's job is to read you the third line. It's the same thing. Like, people try to shortcut it. It's like, no, the only purpose of this piece of content is to get the maximum number of people to take the course, or whatever the heck the next step is. It could be to attend an event. It could be to whatever, but something that is, or maybe it's to download another thing. Like maybe it's a research report. And that's maybe another whole thing to talk about, but whatever. And then that other thing you gate, because now you have the maximum number of people that are actually doing an action that shows intent, that you can use that data to say, okay, I'm going to reach out to these people in this way and these other people in this other way, like people who completed the course versus didn't. So I think this is like, you will, you know, I mean, we can do the math, like what the average conversion rate on a downloadable is, what, like a couple of percentage points, right? So if you say whatever, 1,000, make this really simple, 1,000 people see the downloadable, that means that 20 of them actually download it and see it and go through it, which means you only have a sample, 20 people that maybe will go to the course. And then what's that conversion rate there? Let's even assume it's 50%. That's 10 people. Now, if 1,000 people get to see it without downloading and 50%, and it's still a 50% rate, well, now you just got 500 people that took your course. Which one would you rather have? Right. So that's the other thing, is like the think through the full funnel, deciding where you're going to gate.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Aaron in the chat said, do you think the challenge is lead gen is just a tactic, but not a strategy? Most lead gen abusers don't have a solid marketing strategy in place. I think that's that, right? If this is your play, if that's all you do, if that's as far as the logic or the strategy behind it goes, is we got to pump up those MQLs for sales, you're not gonna get a lot done. Which leads me to the point that I was going to make, is that it's not the path of least resistance to do this. It's harder to take this approach, or to think about some of these things. It's easier to just flip a form on, put it behind it, you know, and especially because marketers are, and this needs to change, marketers are driven based on volume, and that's because SDRs demand that, and that's because they have a quota. So it's all tied into this overall strategy that's just misaligned with what the customer actually wants in their journey. And so I think Aaron's right. It is that, you know, if lead gen is all you do in the absence of everything else, you might as well just wrap up shop and not do anything, because it's not going to work. There has to be a strategy in place. You have to look at, should we gate this? Should we not gate this? And have a strategy like we've talked about behind it. Otherwise, you may as well not do it. And it's going to take time. That's the other thing. It's not going to happen overnight. It's going to take time.
I can give an example of why what I've done in the past and why I'm not quite as quick to ungate everything. And I think the main thing is, you know, again, if it's something that's really valuable, that's going to get a lot of people's attention, but doesn't necessarily show you that person is closer to buying or is somebody who could ultimately become a customer, ungate it. You want to gate things that show that person could actually be a customer at some point. And so that way you're, again, start building relationship with them early on. There's going to be a lot of people that are influenced by what you do, maybe even peers, and it's still worth it to have them. They could become a future employee, or they could go work somewhere later down the road where they recommend you. You know, there's all kinds of reasons that you want people to consume that content as much as possible, but you don't want your sales team spending time with somebody who could never be a customer. That's not a very sustainable approach. Or at least not to spend the majority of their time doing that. So then the question is, like, how do you gauge that? And this goes back to, I learned this from Digital Marketer a long time ago, courses that they have, and it still is sticking with me. And kind of built this framework off of that. So it's seeing the stages that you're gating as that person saying they're interested in moving the conversation forward. And this is kind of the old school way of saying this. Maybe it's not the most like politically correct way to say it, but if you look at the dating game, the way that people typically approach gated content is, they go to the bar, they sit down next to somebody and they're like, hey, will you marry me? You're a creep. Leave me alone. You're asking for too much without building that rapport and without that person saying, yes, I'm interested. Whereas if you start out with something that's a much smaller ask, you're much more likely to get that person to connect with you, which, by the way, wouldn't recommend going to a bar to find a spouse. Probably might not be my first place I would look, but that's a different story. So, using that example, no, you go, you sit down next to them, you go, oh man, can I buy you a drink? Or, whatever. You have some dumb pickup line. Looks like you're looking lonely over here. Can I buy you a drink and sit down? If they say yes to that, that's showing a level of intent, right? It doesn't show they're ready to get married. It shows that they're interested in talking with you. They got something of value. They think you look good, whatever. You're evaluating each other. You still don't go to marriage after that, right? You go to, oh man, I loved hanging out tonight. Would you go to coffee with me tomorrow? That's still not asking for marriage. You're asking for coffee. You're asking them, hey, is there still interest here? If they say yes, that's showing you, hey, this is worth investing some of my time. So you go to coffee a couple times and then you go, hey, I'd love to have you out for dinner, right? That's more serious. And you do that for a while and you build relationship with people. So there's this back and forth of that person showing you interest and you're giving them something of value in return. And then over time, you're building this deeper relationship. And at a certain point when it makes sense, you ask them to marry you and you're going to be very surprised if they say no at that point. Most of the time, if you're going to ask for marriage after that, you've got a really high percentage of, actually seeing that happen, right? So then if you think of gated content like that, it's a way for that person to raise their hand and say, yes, I'm interested. So there's certain levels that you can be looking at that person is saying, this is interesting to me. I want to go deeper. So the example is in a previous job, we wrote this really in-depth article. Originally, we launched it just purely as an ebook. Then we ungated it, and we had it as an option for people to download it if they wanted to. And it literally says on there, hey, do you not have time to read this right now and you want it as an ebook? Download it. Tons of people still downloaded it and filled out the form so they could have it later. And that shows that there was value in that content because they wanted it, right? Then we had other follow-ups, both on the page and through the ebook and through follow-up emails to join. Originally, it was a calculator. And then later on, we changed it to a webinar that went deeper on the topic. And then not nearly as many people went to the webinars, downloaded the ebook, but it was this next stage. If they went through that webinar, they were much closer to buying. In that webinar, we're explaining the example of what we do, but it was more of like the category. We're reshaping their worldview through that webinar. We followed up with that saying, hey, would you like to see a demo of, this particular thing in action? It was another webinar where they got to watch on their own terms our software in action. Once they went through that, they were very likely to end up buying from us at that point. That's when the sales guy gets involved, and we had a follow-up that they would fill out themselves saying they were interested in getting a demo on their own stuff. And so then we would have a live demo. They would send us our parts. They'd sign an NDA, and our close rate on that was extremely high. And so, by doing that process, we cut our sales cycle down from 18 months to 24 months to 90 days for most of the customers and 30 days for other customers. So it was building that rapport and relationship, getting them to our point of view and getting them to talk to a sales guy at the right time when they were ready way sooner in the process. And there's no way that we would have been able to see results that quickly if we waited for that person to self-identify and fill out a form.
100%. I think between that and James, what you were talking about, I'm a data nerd, so I'm gonna bring everything back to measurement if you guys let me. Like you mentioned MQLs, right? Well, what's the definition of an MQL? Like in my opinion, if like an example, Joseph, that you were giving, the MQL doesn't happen, and it doesn't happen at the form fill. In my mind, it happens at that next stage. Or the example we were talking about before, with the downloadable and then the course. In my mind, the MQL happens at the course, right? So, like, what's the intent? At which point you're actually saying, like, yeah, like at the end of the day, if you want to use the word lead, it's still a lead. Like what? Like it's not just it's a it's somebody that's breathing. Yay, my MQL. No, I think they've shown some sort of intent, and not just an intent to research, intent to take action. Like, that's the key, right? And if you assign your definitions correctly, then we can stop having this argument, the MQL is dead. It's like, no, it's not. You just have to define it appropriately and then know what to do with it next. Like, there's no inherent issue with the word, like with the terminology, as much as there is with how are you getting it? How are you defining it? And what are you doing next? Right. And I think, Joseph, that's what you're describing, which is we didn't hard sell them at that point. We literally offered extra help. And what I would say the maybe a step up from that would be, again, set the expectation. Like, hey, you're going to download this thing, and when you do, we're going to follow up with whatever. Again, you're not going to give them 10 sentences, but like, the idea is, here's how we're going to follow up. All right, do anything else? We're going to follow up this way. It's sort of like, in sales, what people usually, like sales coaches, whatever, will tell you is, tell them what you're going to do and then do it. Nobody gets upset at that. It's like, hey, if I tell you, especially if it's a cold thing, maybe a little different. Although I'm sure the psychology works there too. But for sure, if I'm talking to you and say, hey, I'm going to follow up with I'm leaving you a voicemail. I say, hey, I'm going to follow up with an email to help expedite this or to provide some information, whatever. And then I follow up with that email. Are you going to be upset at that? No, you're going to be like, oh, wow, this person followed up. Cool. Just like if you say, hey, after downloading this thing, or after going through this course, we'll follow up and see if you want extra help and whatever. Are they going to be upset when you send that piece of communication? No, they're not. I mean, look, some people will. Like, you're not going to please everybody at the end of the day. And maybe a question I'd love to ask both of you and really anybody else that's listening. I'm curious in people's thoughts. Like, there's no really, I guess, for me, the main thing I love people to take away is, like, there's a lot of gray area. There's no perfect answer to this. And the reality is that I think people need to realize is there's always a trade-off. There's always an opportunity cost, right? The opportunity cost to gating, there's a couple, right? One is you're missing out on people consuming the content, at least some percentage. That's a guarantee, just because you did put a gate in front of it. And potentially, whatever your next step from there is, there's an opportunity cost to maybe you're alienating some people. So how are you, at the end of the day, it's a business. And I think that's the part that I think other people miss too, is like, oh, well, we have to do everything for the customer. Customer's always right. I'm like, at the end of the day, I got a business to run. So I still got to, like, at some point it comes down to a math problem of, yeah, you're not, like, either way, you're not going to make everybody happy. Someone's going to be pissed. So where can I as a business make the most and build the most quality relationships while having the least risk and the least opportunity cost? That's the question you got to have. So I'm curious on, again, Joseph, James, what your thoughts are on that idea and concept. And if anybody in the chat, I know we have a few people, last I looked, in there. If anybody's got any ideas, I'd love to hear from you.
I think that's a good summary. Is you're going to piss off somebody. Point number one. Point number two is don't date in the bar, is what Joseph said. So,
let me take anything away.
Somebody,
just the takeaways.
Christina mentioned if you do meet somebody at a bar, don't wait 3 days.
No, wait 3 days, right? She said you got to follow the 3-day rule, right? You can't be too eager to follow.
I don't know. Maybe I read that wrong. Anyway, whatever. Gabby and I didn't meet at a bar, so I have no idea.
That's hilarious.
It's a good point, though. I don't see any questions in the chat. Joseph, are you going to say something?
Yeah, I mean, I think that to me, what the value is of gating this content, like we're talking about, is you actually are saving your sales team time, because when they do engage with somebody, they've shown a level of intent. Like, whatever you have to think through the content. It's not just throwing whatever content out there and saying, woohoo. It's going, what is something that is going to show us that this person is at least trying to solve the problem that we solve? So if you do that, they're at least trying to solve the problem. And so I do want to keep certain people from seeing that content, because I only want people who are trying to solve the problem. And then if it's a long way for that person to make a decision, whatever, maybe I have a third piece in there that qualifies people even more. And the point is to figure out, do they have the pain? Are they trying to solve it? And can we help them? I mean, budget is obviously important in there too, that you might not figure out through, form fills and whatever. But, if somebody's gone through all of those stages and then they talk to somebody in sales, you're saving your sales team an incredible amount of time, and you're making the experience for the person on the other end significantly better because they get to build rapport and build relationship with the salesperson ahead of time. And I mean, I'll throw one more piece out there that we could maybe, since we're getting close to the end of our time, we could kind of tie it in together. But it's, if your sales team is active in building their personal brand, if they're active in creating content, as part of their job, maybe they're the person that runs the course. So how cool is it to then get to sit down with the person who taught the course and get them to validate the worksheets that you did and take a look at it? That's really cool. There's a lot of people that I follow on LinkedIn that if they had a course and I went through it and they offered to sit down for half an hour, I'd be like, heck yeah, that's awesome. And so you're building so much deeper of a relationship if this is not just something where your entire tactic is built around what we're talking about here, but you're activating on LinkedIn, your team's activating on LinkedIn, you're creating content, you're getting it out there. You have people who want to consume content from you because they like all the people that work for your company and they want to hang out with them. If you've got that going on, and then you have gated content that qualifies people so that your sales team is talking to the right people, and then your sales team has built this presence. So when they reach out and they say, hey, I'd love to sit down with you, that person feels like they're sitting down with a celebrity because, they've been seeing that person's content on LinkedIn for a long time. That's going to put the grease on the wheels. And I haven't seen too many companies that are doing that. But I know some people I follow on LinkedIn that if they did that, I'd be stoked to talk to them. So.
I think one last thing I wanted to say is that that we haven't said so far is your buyer has fundamentally changed how they research, how they collect information, how they shop, how they make decisions. And I'm talking recently, after post-COVID. If you are still operating under the assumption that your user today is behaving and deciding on things the same way that they were before 2020, then you need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate and have customer interviews. We talked about that in the last podcast that we did. Do customer interviews, find out what's actually important to them. What do they need? And then, and only then, start filling in what content do they need? What resources do they need? Should we gate them? Should we not gate them? If you haven't done that recently, you need to do that.
You took the words right out of my mouth, which gets back, I think, into
yes.
Which gets back to Aaron's question in terms of strategy. I don't think it's even, to me, it's not even a demand gen versus a lead gen thing. Although obviously we have opinions on that too, but it's more of, I just don't think a lot of companies have a go-to-market strategy at all in the first place. It's all based on a whole bunch of assumptions that have never been validated. Right? So it's sort of like the gate is a microcosm of the bigger thing. Right? Yep. Because what you said is 100% correct. It's what experiences and what content is needed and why. Again, what is the new, what are the experiences they have right now? What are their hesitations? How do you solve for that? Which content is needed? And then from there, you can decide what makes sense to gate based on, do I want to maximize consumption? Do I want to maximize conversation? Those are two different objectives for a piece of content. And then do I want to maximize sales at some point? Right? I think I just said something smart. Look at that, guys.
But then trying to jump in with the sale too early or the conversation too early, you're just going to turn people off. But if you never jump in with the conversation, or you never jump in and this is from Donald Miller or something that he's said before, but don't want to be in the friend zone either. So if you're always just giving away super valuable content, but you never move beyond that and start an actual conversation, not necessarily sales conversation immediately, but you never start a conversation that is going to move towards sales, you're in the friend zone, and that's the worst place to be in. You don't, whatever you do, you don't want to be the person that people love your content, but they don't want to actually buy from you. That's the worst spot to be in.
So there's one other, I want to add one last thing, and then unless you guys, I mean, there's a bunch, we can keep going probably for easily another 30 minutes, but we're not gonna. I know there's at least a few people. Yeah, it looks like there's a few people in the chat here watching live. I want to let people ask questions. Last thing I want to throw out there is the other important thing to understand is, where are you in the evolution of your organization? For example, if you are an enterprise that you have developed like critical mass, if you will, of awareness already, what you're going to have to do is going to be very different from an upstart, because you don't, at that point, you can get away with gating virtually nothing other than maybe your community, let's just say, because you want to manage members. And that's like, if you look at Salesforce as an example. I think Salesforce does some decent amount of gating still. I don't know. But like, there's like, if you look at other like enterprise companies, they gate oftentimes, except for maybe Gartner, less and less, right? Because at some point, everybody knows about you. So you have no need to go after them. You're better off letting the maximum number of people get educated and identify problems and find solutions, and then identify you as the trusted source, and they're gonna go to you, right? But you can't do that if nobody knows who the hell you are, right? So if you're a Proofpoint Marketing, right? I mean, we've built up a decent name, but look, does everybody know who we are? No, they don't. Although interesting, actually, we don't get anything at this point. So maybe we got to start. It's on our thing. Like courses and stuff are actually on our roadmap, in case anybody's wondering. So anyway, does anybody who's still here have questions?
Let's see if we've got.
I don't know who's still here. Let me see.
I don't see any new questions. I see a lot of.
Well, if you're there, ask a question real quick in the chat, and we'll answer it. One more thing, just as we're talking about it, one easy way to add some value to your audience through gating content and test some of this out is take a piece of content that gets a lot of traffic right now that is ungated, and think of a content upgrade for that. What is a worksheet, a calculator, a workbook, something like that you could put on that page? So you're not gating anything that you have right now, but you're thinking of something that's going to make it more valuable. Just see what happens. And if nobody if nobody puts in their info, you learn your lesson. Maybe that wasn't, but also maybe you shouldn't be creating content that doesn't drive people to want to take some kind of action in general. Is that the kind of content you want to be creating and spending all of your effort on? Or is it better to do things that are closer to being, middle to bottom of the funnel anyway, where somebody would be willing to take that kind of action? But content upgrades are a great way to test out some gated content. And, to James's point about the buying journey has changed, honestly, I think it's gone further back to what it used to be forever ago, which is, especially in our space where we're working with very complex, big B2B sales, or, you're talking about hundreds of thousands or sometimes millions of dollars. A lot of those deals are made through relationship. Like, oh, I worked with this organization 5 years ago and they were amazing. I think we should bring them in. And, that's a lot of what happens. So then the question is, how do you scale that? And so some of creating gated content to start conversations with people is a way to start building that rapport and starting that relationship and, getting some of that going. And so, is it a SaaS? Does that work in the SaaS space? I don't know. That's not really the space we're typically in. But, I think if you're in these complex spaces, it's worth, really thinking about.
All right, one last thing, and then I promise I'll wrap up. There was one other topic I thought we'd maybe get into, and maybe I'll just say my piece on it, and then we can leave it on a cliffhanger for people. But something to think about, and I'm going to test this out and see what you guys think. I think you have to change the mindset from gated content to gated experiences. So what I mean by that is, there are certain experiences that simply require a quote unquote gate. I mentioned events. I mentioned email, newsletters, but there are other like calculators could require it. Maybe that's debatable, But, courses, especially if you want, again, is the gate required? Is contact info required for the functionality of the thing? Right. So sort of when you think about gamification, right, the reason you're doing it is because, yes, you want to collect some first party data, but you also make it a value add that, you can personalize things like the game is, if it's a game, right, it's different, but it's sort of like, if it's a course, for example, does you logging in save where you stopped watching the video and save your work if there's a worksheet involved? That's a value add. Like, could you do it without the gate and open it up? Sure. But now you don't have the functionality. So I think about it as gated experiences. And even for like events, like, is it an event that needs to be gated? Is there value in you limiting attendance? Right? Now, newsletters you can't do anything about. Like, you need people's emails to send email, right? But like, there are a bunch of other things I think that people can think through, and more around gated experience rather than just gated content.
I like that. We did have one last question real quick.
Question.
My buddy, Michael Braband, love that guy. He said, how much of your day should you be spending creating this type of content? I mean, I see what you guys think, but I think a lot of that, I hate answering questions with it depends, but it depends on what your role is. It depends on what your industry is, how much education your buyer needs before they can make a decision. So I think there's a lot of variables there, but once you do know that, if that's your focus, I think you're just constantly obsessed with thinking about those questions of what is helpful, what do they need, doing the customer research to validate those things. So if you're a content marketer, 100% of your day, right? But if your marketing strategy or maybe even getting into some of the sales enablement or where you're more responsible for revenue, things like that, there's a good chunk, maybe not of your day, but of your week, right? Where you're needing to do that kind of stuff. I don't know if you guys have thoughts on that.
I do. Joseph, I'll let you answer first, and I got my thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say if you're getting to James's point, it kind of depends on lots of factors. But if I was I'll just say if I was the main content marketing person at a company, because that's, or at least I was for one product in a previous role, and so I can answer from that perspective, where I would have been responsible for both. I would be looking at, am I actually getting traffic on stuff that I have right now? If not, you're getting something that nobody's going to see. So, maybe create something that people are interested in seeing first. So, for example, we do this LinkedIn Live thing. We start doing this every week, and we do that for a while. We start getting regular people coming. What's a gated piece of content we could add that would get people from this conversation to go a level deeper with our company and kind of move to the next level? If I'm getting people to attend, then I go, well, how do I get somebody to move from being an attendee to being a participant, and kind of to raise their hand? So once you hit that level where you're getting attention, but you're not necessarily getting somebody to talk with you, what's that piece of content you could create to go to that next stage? So if you are getting a lot of traffic right now, I would say it's a great time to test something out on a high traffic page, or, you get people to come to an event. What's that next piece that gets them to get closer to engaging with your team in real conversations?
Yeah, I think that's in a detailed perspective, I think, as an example, I think that's a great way to put it. I'll give you a more general answer, which is, as long as your job is in some way, shape, or form related to this, like if you're a salesperson, you probably shouldn't be spending time thinking about gated content. But outside of that, I would say 100% of your time should be spent on understanding your customer, which leads into how much of this type of content you need to create. Right? Like, I don't know that I can't think of I don't know that I can put a number to it, honestly, in terms of how much time should be spent creating that content. I don't know. But I can tell you is the entirety of your time should be spent, especially if you're in a smaller marketing team, or if you're the sole marketer, all of your time should be spent understanding your customer and testing things out. Part of which is going to be testing out what gets gated, what doesn't, etc. But the first step is, like we talked about, understanding who they are, what they need, why they need it, how they feel, all that stuff. That dictates which content you even create in the first place. And then you start thinking about all those other things, like, am I going after consumption? Am I going after conversation, etc., etc.? I don't know. I'm pretty sure I just answered a question with a question, but to a certain extent. But.
I know we could keep going on this forever, but one other thing that this whole concept works with is something that we just had somebody come to us with, and we're thinking through, which is validating something that's new. And so, like, gating content is a way to validate messaging. If somebody is not interested in the message at all, they're not going to download something. So it's kind of a way to validate certain types of messaging, and that's just for learning even more than for follow-up. So that's one piece. But the other piece is, what if you're reaching an audience that's kind of stealth mode? You can't just target them through interest targeting or through job title. So, for instance, if they are the CEO of a startup that has to stay in stealth mode for the first 3 years that they're in business, which is a real use case, you can't target them through paid ads.
Ooh, that's a good point.
And so in that case, like creating an event where you get people to grassroots, invite people to come, and then you have some type of gated content, so you actually figure out who these people are, so you can start having conversations with them. But if you don't gate, it's gonna be much more difficult to get that conversation and get something going at all. So when you're starting out, I think creating this more middle of the funnel type content like this is actually maybe the most valuable, because it's a way to start building that initial audience and validating your messaging, your product market fit, what your product should be to begin with, getting customer interviews. It's all going to be a lot easier if you start with something like this and then start building out your scale mechanisms later.
Yeah, I think that's an awesome point you brought up. I mean, I know where it's coming from. It's for the actual client example that you just mentioned. But in general, I think a lot of heavily regulated industries, depending on who you're targeting within those, you're going to run into people who are either in stealth mode, like you said, or they're just not active on social because they either can't be or they're afraid to be. And sure, you
or they don't have time.
You can, or that. I mean, you can run display ads at them, I guess, but we all know how effective that is. So, yeah, that's an awesome example. All right. James, one more thing.
Don't date in bars, I think.
Don't date in bars. That's how we're going to
dating analogy. I love that dating analogy. And just what I said a minute ago, do the customer research. If you don't know those things, then that's what 100% of your time should be focused on right now until you do.
100%.
Well, gentlemen, let's wrap it up on that note. For anybody that either was listening or will in the future, that views the recording or whatnot, if you like this type of format, please let us know. Again, we're going to be posting this in the podcast as well, the Master Marketer Show. We're testing these types of formats out and a bunch of other stuff. So if you like it, give us a comment, give us a review, let us know. We'll maybe do more of these in the future.
Hey, and if you were on the live stream, maybe I won't offer this to the podcast just because it might get a little too extreme, but if you're trying to validate whether you need a gated piece of content or whether you should ungate it, send me a DM on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to take a look at it with you and continue the conversation.
I think you're making an assumption that we've got tens of thousands of people who listen to the show. I don't know that we're that popular yet.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thanks, guys. This has been fun, and we'll catch you all again soon.
All right. Bye-bye.